Hi everyone, we continue our lectures on the introduction into the New Testament. Lecture 2 for week 1, the historical context of Jesus and the New Testament. We are going to look at the historical background today, particularly Persian and Greek. Palestine during Jesus' time was a part of the Roman Empire, but before that it had been under control of several powerful ancient kings. In 597, Jerusalem was taken by the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar II. 10 years later, it was destroyed and the Jews went into Babylonian exile, modern Iraq. In 539, Cyrus of Persia conquered Babylon and allowed the Jews to return to their homeland to rebuild the temple. That happened under Ezra and Nehemiah. The Old Testament story ends with the Jews returning from the Babylonian exile and rebuilding the temple. But return home was not that simple and straightforward. Not all the Jews returned home. Some stayed in Babylon, others dispersed to other countries, such as Egypt. The rebuilding of the temple was a very slow process. The Jews did not have enough means to rebuild it to Solomon's former glory. The returning Jews were still the subjects of the Persian king and as such vulnerable to oppression and the whims of their Persian masters. The Jews had internal problems with the Samaritans. Although the Samaritans worshipped the God of Israel, the Jews were suspicious of them and hostile to their offers of collaboration because they considered them half-pagans, as they were descendants of mixed marriages. This relationship probably forced the Samaritans to build their own temple on the Mount Gerizim, which infuriated the Jews even further. These hostile relations are transparent in the New Testament when Jesus speaks to the Samaritan woman. We have to remember that even the fact of starting a conversation with the Samaritan woman was an act of reconciliation. What is the significance or what are the implications of the Persian period? As the Jews returned to their homeland, they tried to understand their religious and social identity in the context of political powerlessness and economic weakness. They tried to evaluate their relationship to God, and it became important for them, particularly for the pious ones, to maintain the Mosaic law and to keep themselves pure from the people like the Samaritans and, of course, the Gentiles. Others thought that it was the time to assimilate with the culture around them. Even those who did not want to assimilate did it anyway. This provided the condition for the development of various sects or schools of thought. It was around this time that the Sadducee party emerged as the party of priests and allied elites. Cyrus left priests as the dominant authority. He did not allow the restoration of Judean monarchy. Later on, we read about Pharisees, pious Jews, a party that emerged largely out of the group of scribes and sages. The Pharisees were considered the most experts and accurate expositors of Jewish law. The Essenes lived in various cities, but congregated in communal life, dedicated to asceticism. Some groups practiced celibacy, voluntary poverty, and daily immersion. Some of them may be living near the Dead Sea, where the scrolls were discovered. In 336 BC, Philip of Macedonia, who formed a united kingdom of Greece, was succeeded by his son Alexander. Alexander proceeded to conquer the known world. Within 10 years, he created the largest empire the world had ever known. Look at the map. He dies prematurely in 323. Although his empire did not last, the spreading of Greek culture and language, known as Hellenization, continued long after his death. Greek became the international language of those days. Even the Hebrew Bible was translated into Greek in the 3rd century, known as Septuagint. After Alexander's death, the empire was divided. Palestine was first ruled by Ptolemies of Egypt. At that time, many Jews settled in Alexandria. Then the control of Palestine passed to Seleucids, whose capital was in Syria, Antioch. Ptolemies, like the Persians, had a lenient approach to the Jews, allowing them some freedom. The Seleucids had a different approach, especially under Antioch IV, who ruled in 175 to 163 and took the name Epiphanes. Epiphanes wanted Hellenization of the world. The Seleucids had a different approach, especially under Antioch IV, who ruled between 175 and 163. He took the name Epiphanes. Epiphanes wanted Hellenization of the world and needed finances, and so he intervened into the Jewish affairs by appointing high priests who would support him. The first one, Jason, built a gymnasium near the temple. The Jews were very unhappy about that. The second, Menelaus, was not even from the proper high priest family. The relationship between Epiphanes and the Jews were rapidly deteriorating. Finally, in 167-164, Epiphanes attacked Jerusalem, killed many of his opponents, and looted the temple. He prohibited the observance of the Sabbath, the circumcision of the Jewish boys. He rededicated the temple to Olympian Zeus, erecting a pagan altar. Those series of events provoked Jewish resistance and led to a revolt by one particular family, the Hasmoneans. Mattathias and his sons called people to start a guerrilla campaign. Their resistance became known by the name Maccabees, the nickname given to Mattathias' eldest son Judas, namely Maccabees, Hammer. He led the Jews to resist the Seleucids, forced them to leave Jerusalem. He rededicated the temple in 164. This event of liberation is celebrated by the Jews until nowadays. The Feast of Dedication, or Hanukkah. We have reference to this event in John chapter 10, verse 22. The events of this period are reflected in the book of the Maccabees, the first one in particular. The heroic actions of the Maccabees served as an example for many generations of Jewish people, and particularly the Zealots, who were a political movement in the 1st century, which sought to incite the people of Judea province to rebel against the Roman Empire and expel it from the Holy Land by force of arms. The Hasmoneans continued to rule until 63 BC. However, not all the Maccabean actions were met with approval. Judas was killed as his brothers Simon and Jonathan. Simon, son Hyrcanus, conquered Samaria, Idumea, and part of Galilee, forcing their residents to accept Judaism and circumcision. They attacked Samaria and destroyed their temple, leaving deep wounds in the minds of the Samaritans. The pious Jews stopped supporting the Maccabees when Jonathan allowed himself to be regarded as the high priest, and Aristobulus, a generation later, took the title of the king. The Hasmoneans were neither a part of the priestly family nor of the royal Davidic family. Gennaeus, the successor of Aristobulus, went into a violent conflict with the Pharisees. Josephus, the historian, says that he crucified hundreds of Pharisees and killed 50,000 of his opponents. The situation was finally changed by the Roman power.